Get her out of my yard before she loses a hand. This isn't a place for a woman who reads dogs out of a paperback." Warrant Officer Colburn Corden said it loud enough to carry across the whole kennel row at Lackland, loud enough that the 2 junior handlers by the wash rack stopped what they were doing and looked over. The 16 animals in the run behind him were already up on their feet, hackles standing, a wall of teeth and sound pressed against the chain link. Corden liked them like that. He had spent 4 years building that pack into the loudest, meanest thing on the base, and he read the noise as proof of his own hand. The woman he was talking to did not step back. She stood at the mouth of the training yard in a plain grey field jacket with no patches on it, a clipboard held flat against her thigh, and she watched the dogs the way a person watches weather. Not the way a civilian watches, not the way a nervous handler watches, checking the gate latch twice. She watched the way you watch something you already understand and are only confirming. Nobody stepped in for her. That was the thing about Corden's yard. People had learned to look at their boots when he got going. She did not run. She did not argue. She did not so much as shift her weight to the back foot. She let her eyes move down the line of the run, animal to animal. And something in her face went very slightly quieter, the way a face goes when it finds the one loose thread in a knot. To Corden, that stillness was worse than if she had flinched. A flinch he could have used. A flinch was a woman admitting she was out of her depth in front of his handlers, and he could have sent her packing with a joke that would live in the yard for a month. This calm, this flat, unbothered reading of his dogs like they were a page of numbers. This was an insult he did not have a slot for, so he made his voice bigger to cover the gap. 16 dogs, he said. You know what 16 dogs is? It's the reason nobody walks in here without me. And you're standing there with a clipboard like you're counting inventory. Behind the fence, the biggest of the 16, a black and tan Malinois with a scar splitting one ear, threw himself against the link, and the whole pack answered him. The sound climbed. One of the junior handlers actually took half a step backward. The woman in the grey jacket did not. There is a question that Yard should have been asking, and it did not ask it yet. Not who she was. Something smaller and closer than that. Why does she keep looking at the 4th dog from the gate, the quiet one at the back, and not at the animal throwing itself against the fence? Her name was Reeve Lockstead, and she had been at Lackland for exactly 3 days. She was there on paper as a program reviewer, which is the kind of title that means nothing to a man like Corden, and everything to the people above him. The 341st Training Squadron trains military working dogs for every branch, and somebody 2 pay grades over Corden's head had ordered a review of the aggression protocols in his kennel after a bite log that had gotten too long to keep explaining away. 14 documented bites in 11 months. 3 of them handlers. One of them, a 9-year-old on a base tour, who had wandered a foot too close to a fence line Corden had certified as secure. None of that was in the file Corden had been shown. He had been told a reviewer was coming, and had decided, before she ever arrived, exactly how little she would matter. Reeve set the clipboard down flat on the top rail of the training yard fence. She did not raise her voice to match his. Your 4th dog from the gate is favoring his right hind, she said. He's been favoring it long enough that the rest of the pack has stopped challenging him for the middle of the run. That's why your line looks tight. It isn't discipline. It's an injured animal the others have already written off, and a pack that's reorganizing around the hole he left. For a second, Corden did not have anything. Then he laughed, because laughing was the tool he reached for when he had nothing. "You read that off a clipboard," he said. "I read it off your dogs," she said. "The clipboard's for the parts I have to write down." She picked the clipboard back up. She turned and walked toward the squadron building without waiting to be dismissed. And the walk was the calmest thing anyone in that yard had seen in a long time, and it made Corden angrier than anything she could have said. What none of them knew, what would not surface for 11 more days, was that the fourth dog from the gate was going to be the thing that ended Colburn Cordan's career. Not because Reeve was going to do anything to it, because she had already seen, in 10 seconds at a fence line, the exact lie his whole kennel was built on. If you have ever stood in a room where a loud man mistook your silence for weakness, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. This one is going to travel. The bite log was worse in person than on paper. Reeve spent the first evening in the records office with a box of incident reports and a cold cup of coffee she never drank. And she did the thing she always did, which was to build the timeline before she trusted anybody's summary. She laid the 14 bites out by date on the desk in front of her, and then she laid the daily kennel logs beside them, and she went looking for the shape. There is a shape to a kennel that is being run well, and a different shape to one that is being run on fear. And she had learned to tell them apart a long way from Texas. In a well-run kennel, the bites cluster around training escalations, around new dogs, around the predictable stress points, and they taper as the animals settle. In Corden's kennel, the bites did not taper. They climbed. And they climbed alongside a second number in his own logs that he had clearly never thought anyone would cross-reference, the number of times he had logged a dog as corrected after a session. Corrected. It was a clean word. Reeve knew exactly what it was covering. She flagged 11 dates where a bite incident fell within 36 hours of a logged correction on the same animal. 11 out of 14. She wrote the dates down in her own hand, small and even, in the margin of her notebook. And she underlined the date of the boy on the base tour, because that one had a correction logged the night before, and a 9-year-old had paid for it. She did not write the word she was thinking. She wrote the dates. The dates would do the work. A feeling is arguable. A pattern of 11 dates in a man's own handwriting is not. Somewhere in the building a door closed, and Reeve registered it and did not look up. The next morning, she was back at the fence at 06:10 before the yard filled, and Master Sergeant Ansel Kelbourne found her there. Kelbourne ran the kennel maintenance side, the feeding and the vet coordination, and the 1,000 unglamorous things that kept 16 animals alive, and he had been doing it long enough to have watched 3 handlers come and go over Corden's dogs. He was a big, slow-moving man with a way of standing very still, and when he came up beside Reeve at the fence that morning, he went stiller than usual. He was watching her hands. She had her right hand loose at her side, fingers relaxed, and she was making a small sound in the back of her throat, so low it was almost under hearing. And the black and tan, with the split ear, the loud one, the one Corden called his best, had stopped throwing himself at the link. He had sat down. He was watching her the way the others watched Corden, except there was no fear in it. Kelborn had run this kennel long enough to know that dog did not sit for anyone. He said nothing. He filed it. But something in his chest had gone very still, the way a thing goes still when it recognizes an order of skill it has only heard about. "You've worked a pack," he said finally. It was not a question. "I've worked a few," she said. "That correction log," Kelborn said, and then he stopped himself, because saying the rest of it out loud in Corden's yard could cost him. He looked at the split-ear dog sitting quiet in the run. "You should be careful what you write down. He's got friends up the chain, the kind who make a review, go away." "I know," Reeve said. "That's why I'm writing it down in the order it happened, and not in the order it makes me angry." She left the fence. Kelborn stood there another minute, with the split-ear dog watching him, and then he went and did something he would not tell her about for another week. He made a phone call to a man he had served with, a man now sitting in a wing headquarters, and he described a grey field jacket with no patches, and a woman who could sit Corden's worst dog with a sound in her throat. And he asked the man on the other end a single question. The man on the other end told him to walk away and let it happen. Kelborn did not know what that meant yet. He would. There was one dog in the run that nobody could handle, and on the fourth morning, Reeve fixed it. And the way she fixed it was the first thing that made the yard start to wonder. It was a young Dutch shepherd, barely 2 years, that Corden had entered in the logs as washout material. It would not settle for feeding. It would not take a lead. It spun in its kennel and shredded anything soft it was given, and had already opened one handler's forearm to the bone, and Corden's answer had been to log it corrected twice, and then to stop putting his hands anywhere near it. Reeve stood outside its kennel for 40 minutes on the fourth morning, and did not open the gate. She just crouched at the wire, at the animal's eye level, and waited, and did the low sound in her throat, and let the dog do all the deciding. The junior handlers gathered without meaning to. Even the two who laughed at Corden's jokes drifted over, because a handler who could sit that dog was a thing worth seeing. "He's not aggressive," Reeve said, quiet, not turning her head. "He's overwhelmed. Somebody corrected him for panicking, so now he panics about being corrected. So now he's panicking all the time. You can't fix fear with more fear. It just compounds." She waited until the dog came to the wire on its own. Then, and only then, she opened the gate, and she did not reach for the animal. She let it reach for her, and it put its head against her knee and stood there shaking, and then stopped shaking. 43 minutes, start to finish. One of the junior handlers, a kid named Private Liddell, would tell the board later that it was the first time in 6 months he had seen that dog stand still. It was not the reveal. It was a first proof, handed out in installments, and Reeve knew the difference, even if the yard did not. She stood the young shepherd, and she noted the time in her book, and she wrote, in the same small, even hand, that a dog logged twice as corrected and once as washout had settled for a stranger in under an hour. Another date. Another line that did not read as an accusation, and was one. "Where'd you learn that?" Private Lydell asked her, low, so Corden would not hear. Somewhere with worse dogs and higher stakes, she said, and left it there. And the not answering was its own small hook that the kid would turn over for days. Corden spent that week making the review expensive for her. He could not throw her out. He was smart enough, barely, to know that a reviewer with orders was a reviewer with cover. So he did the other thing. The thing men like him do when they cannot expel a threat. He shrank the space she was allowed to occupy, 1 degree at a time. First, it was access. He had the yard keys reissued and hers left off the list, so that every morning she had to stand at the gate and wait for a junior handler to let her in front of whoever happened to be watching. A small humiliation, repeated daily in public. She said thank you to the junior handler every single time, by name, which somehow made it worse for Corden, because the handlers started saying good morning back. Then it was the nickname. By Wednesday, he was calling her the paperback lady, a callback to the first morning, and the 2 handlers who owed him their evaluations laughed on cue every time. Reeve let it sit. She wrote her dates. She checked the 4th dog's right hind at the fence every morning and noted, without comment, that it was getting worse and that nobody had called the vet. Then it went bureaucratic, which is where men like Corden always end up when the smaller cruelties do not land. On Thursday, a complaint appeared in the squadron's inbox, filed under a handler's name, but written in a voice Reeve recognized from the correction logs, alleging that the reviewer had entered the yard without authorization and endangered the animals. It was thin. It was also, she understood immediately, a first shot. If the review went against him, that complaint would be the thing he pointed to. She had endangered the dogs. It would be her word against a documented incident report. He was building a record to bury her under. She had seen it before. She answered it the way she answered everything, which was to make her own record cleaner. She logged the exact time she arrived at the gate each morning, the name of the handler who let her in, and the fact that she had never once crossed the fence line. Timestamps, names, the unglamorous armor of a person who has been disbelieved before and learned what actually holds up. On Friday, he tried the last thing on the ladder, which was to make it about the dog's safety in front of an audience with rank. He arranged for a captain from the training group to walk the kennel, and he walked her through it himself, loud and proprietary. And he stopped at the 4th dog's run and said, for the captain's benefit, that his reviewer had been spreading a story about an injured animal that the vet had cleared. There was no vet record. He was betting she would not call it in the moment, in front of a captain, because that is a thing that gets a reviewer written up for insubordination. Reeve did not raise her voice. She asked the captain, evenly, whether he would like to see the animal walk a straight 30 feet. The captain, who had not expected to be handed anything concrete, said yes. The dog favored the right hind so plainly by the 10th stride that the captain stopped it himself. Reeve gave him the date the injury first appeared in Corden's own daily log as sound, from memory, and offered to pull the page. The captain wrote the date down in his own notebook. That notebook page would matter more, 3 weeks later, than anything Corden ever shouted. She had turned his audience into her witness, and she had done it without once contradicting him directly. She let his own dog do the contradicting. The clock she could not control was the one she cared about most. The fourth dog's hind leg had 11 days on it before this review closed, and she rotated out. And an injury a pack has already written off does not stay a leg injury. She had seen where that goes. A dog the others have decided is finished is a dog that gets desperate. And a desperate dog in a pack of 16 that has been trained on fear is a bite waiting for a body to land on. She gave it 11 days. She was wrong. It took 9. On the 9th day, the review nearly ended in the worst possible way, and it was not Reeves' doing, and that was exactly the point. It was late afternoon, and the yard was full. Corden had decided to run a demonstration, because a demonstration in front of the 2 visiting handlers from another squadron was a chance to show that his kennel was under control, and his reviewer was a nervous paperback lady jumping at shadows. He brought the whole pack out into the training yard at once, 16 animals off the run and onto the open ground, which was a thing you did to show dominance, and a thing you did not do with a pack organized around an injury nobody had treated. Reeve was at the fence. She saw it start before Corden did. The fourth dog, the one favoring the right hind, had been shoved toward the outside of the group by the others, the way the written off always get shoved to the edge, and Corden's demonstration had put a stranger in the yard, one of the visiting handlers, standing where the injured dog's escape line ran. Reeve watched the injured animal's weight shift onto its good legs. She watched its head drop a half-inch. She watched the pack's attention swing, because a pack reads its weakest member's panic faster than any human in the yard, and 16 dogs began, all at once, to turn. "Corden," she said. Not loud, flat. He did not hear her, or chose not to. The visiting handler was maybe 8 seconds from being at the center of 16 animals coming apart, and Corden, standing in the middle of it, with his chest out, had no idea, because he had spent 4 years listening to his dogs make noise, and had never once learned to hear the specific silence that comes a half-second before a pack commits. 8 seconds became 6. Reeve counted them the way she counted everything, flat, without panic, because panic was the one thing she had spent a decade training out of herself. The injured dog's lips had gone off its teeth. 2 of the others had dropped their heads to match it. The split-ear dog, the loud one, the one Corden called his best, had gone silent, and its silence was the worst sign in the yard, because the loud one's going quiet is the pack agreeing on a target. 6 seconds became 4. The visiting handler had finally understood something was wrong, and had done the exact wrong thing, which was to take a step back, because a step back is a prey step, and every dog in that yard read it at once. Corden opened his mouth and shouted a command, his usual one, loud, a dominance word, and it did nothing, because a pack that is committing does not hear volume. It only hears the thing it has decided to hear. And Corden had never, in 4 years, been the thing his dogs oriented on when it actually mattered. He had only ever been the thing they feared. And fear is not an anchor. Fear is fuel. 4 seconds. There was no one else. Kelbourne was at the far fence. The junior handlers were frozen. The captain from Friday was not there to see the one thing that would have explained everything. Reeve knew that silence. She had spent a career learning it in places with no fence at all. Here is the part the Yard did not know about the woman in the grey jacket. 10 years before Lackland, in a war zone, the file called Operation Kandak Lantern, Reeve Lockstead had run the single largest multi-dog patrol program in that theatre, a program built to move explosive detection and patrol teams through villages where a wrong step killed people. Her call sign on the net had been load break. She had handled packs that made Cordon's 16 look like a starter kit, under fire, with no margin, and she had done it by learning the one thing Cordon never had. She had learned that you do not control a pack by being the loudest thing in the yard. You control it by being the one steady thing in it, the fixed point the animals orient to when everything else comes apart. A pack in chaos is looking for something to anchor on. Most men try to be the biggest threat. The ones who are actually good learn to be the still center. She did not tell any of them that. She had never once told them that. She had let Cordon call her the paperback lady for 9 days. She stepped over the fence. She did not run at the dogs. Running is a prey signal, and she had put that lesson into the bones of 200 handlers. She walked, at a pace that had no fear in it, straight into the seam between the injured dog and the swinging pack, and she put herself exactly where the animal's attention was already trying to go, which is the whole trick. The trick nobody teaches because you cannot teach it to someone who is afraid. And then, in a voice that did not rise at all, a voice pitched under the noise so that the dogs had to quiet themselves to catch it, she said one word. She said, "Rest." It was not a magic word. There is no magic word. It was a command word from the program she had built a decade before, a word chosen precisely because it was low and long and carried under panic. A word 200 handlers and every dog they ran had drilled 10,000 times until it lived below thought, and at least a third of the animals in that yard had come up through kennels seeded by handlers she had trained, carrying that word in them like a note they had been waiting years to hear, struck again. The split-ear dog dropped first, then the two beside it, then the injured one at the edge, all the fight going out of its shoulders at once. It moved through the pack the way a single dropped stitch runs through a whole row, animal by animal, 16 of them folding to the ground in under 4 seconds, until the entire yard that had been a wall of teeth a moment before was 16 dogs lying flat in the dirt with their eyes on the woman in the grey field jacket, waiting for the next word. The visiting handler was still standing. He had not even understood he was in danger until it was already over. Nobody in that yard moved. The two handlers who laughed at Cordon's jokes did not laugh. Kelbourne, at the fence, let out a breath he had been holding for 9 days. And Colburn Cordon stood in the middle of 16 dogs that had just lain down for someone else in his own yard, in front of witnesses, and could not make a single sound. The silence after was longer than the 4 seconds that made it. Cordon's face did the thing a certain kind of man's face does, when the story he tells himself about himself stops working all at once. He looked at his own dogs lying in the dirt, and he looked at the paperback lady standing among them, with her hands loose at her sides. and the yard watched him understand that every animal he had spent 4 years terrifying into obedience had just shown him, in front of everyone, that there was another way to be obeyed, and he had never had it. He reached for the only tool he had left. He reached for volume. "You crossed the fence line," he said. His voice cracked on the word line. "That's the second time. I've got a complaint on file from Tuesday, and now this. You endangered my animals." It was a stupid thing to say to a woman standing calmly in the middle of 16 dogs that were resting at her feet, and the moment it left his mouth, he knew it, because the visiting handler he had nearly gotten mauled turned and looked at him with an expression that would end up in a written statement by the end of the week. Reeve did not answer him right away. She crouched, slow, and ran her hand once down the injured dog's right hind, feeling the joint, and the dog let her, and she stood back up. "This animal has an untreated cranial cruciate injury that's at least 3 weeks old," she said, still not loud. "It's in your daily logs as sound. It is not sound. The pack reorganized around it. You brought them out in the open anyway, and 8 seconds ago it nearly cost that man his face." She nodded once at the visiting handler. "The complaint you filed Tuesday says I endangered these dogs. Master Sergeant Kelbourne has the gate log. I've never crossed this fence until the moment you lost your pack. You want to file the second one? Go ahead. It's going in the same folder as the correction logs." The word correction landed in that yard like a dropped plate. The 2 handlers, who had laughed all week, went the color of the dirt, because they knew what was in those logs. They had helped write some of it. "Respect for an animal is a function of understanding it," Reeve said, "not volume. You've had this backward for 4 years, warrant officer, and it's in your own handwriting." She picked her clipboard up off the fence rail where she had left it. And then, because the review was not the point, and had never been the point, she did the thing that actually ended it. She looked at Kelbourne and said, "Sergeant, call the vet for the 4th dog. Now, not tomorrow." And Kelbourne, who outranked half the yard and had spent 4 years not crossing cordon, turned on his heel and went to make the call. And every person standing there understood in that second who the yard now answered to. It was not a coup. Nobody said a word about authority. It was just that the still center of the room had moved, the way it always does, quietly, to the one steady thing, and there was nothing Colburn Cordon could shout that would move it back. The board convened 11 days later, and it was not dramatic, and that was the point. Reeve was not even in the room for most of it. Her part was the file. 14 bites, 11 of them within 36 hours of a logged correction on the same animal, cross-referenced by date in Cordon's own hand. The gate log, with her arrival, time-stamped every morning against the false Tuesday complaint. The vet's report on a 9-year-old, 3-week-old cruciate injury, logged as sound the day Cordon ran the whole pack into the open. And the statement from a visiting handler from another squadron, a man with no stake in Lackland politics, describing 8 seconds in which he nearly lost his face, and 1 word that had put 16 dogs on the ground. You cannot argue with a pattern of dates in your own handwriting. Cordon tried. He was loud in the hearing, too, right up until they read the correction logs back to him, date by date, and set each one beside the bite it had produced, and asked him to explain the boy on the base tour. He did not have volume for that. Volume had been the only thing he ever had, and it does not work in a room that has already read the file. He was relieved of the kennel. Not for cruelty, in the end. For a falsified safety log, which is the cleaner charge and the one that sticks, and which was, if you followed it all the way down, the same thing. Here is the part Reeve did not put in any file, the part that only Kelborn ever heard. The reason she had walked into a war zone's worth of packs a decade before, the reason she had built a program on a low, steady voice instead of a raised one, was a man named Corporal Elian Mars, a handler she had trained early, before she knew enough, back when she still believed a pack could be run on dominance, because that was how she had been taught. Mars had done it her old way, the loud way, with a dog she had certified as ready. And the dog had turned on a patrol under fire, because a pack run on fear breaks toward the nearest body, when the fear finally overflows. And Mars had put himself between that dog and a 19-year-old private, and had not come back from it. She had spent the 10 years since making sure no handler she trained would ever again mistake a loud dog for a controlled one. That was the whole program. That was the word rest, chosen so it would carry under exactly the panic that had killed Elian Mars, drilled into 200 handlers, so that it would live in the dogs longer than any of them served. She had never once said his name in that yard. She had let Corden call her the paperback lady, and had thought about a corporal who went back for a private, and she had written her dates. Kelborn, standing at the fence the morning after the hearing, was the only one she told, and she told it in about 6 sentences. Flat, the way she told everything. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said the vet had pinned the 4th dog's leg, and it would walk. She let her shoulders come down a 1/4 inch that no one would have seen, and then she picked her clipboard back up. Corden she thought about exactly once, and without heat. She had met a dozen men like him. He was not a cruel man in the way people mean when they want a monster. He was a limited man who had been handed 16 animals and a rank, and no way to earn either that did not run through noise. And shame in a limited man comes out as volume, and volume in a kennel eventually comes out as blood. He had built a wall of sound because he could not build anything quieter, and he had believed the sound was control right up until the afternoon. His own dogs lay down for someone he had spent 9 days calling the paperback lady. She did not hate him. She had simply written the dates, because the dates were true, and a boy on a base tour, and a corporal 10 years, and a war away were owed the truth more than Colburn Corden was owed her silence. He cleared out his desk the week after the hearing. On his way past the run, the split-ear dog did not so much as lift its head, and that more than the board was the thing that told him it was over. She stayed 2 more weeks, longer than the review required, to retrain the yard. She did not do it with a speech. She did it the way she did everything, 1 animal and 1 handler at a time, standing very still in the middle of a run, and letting the dogs learn that steady was a thing they could orient on. The split-ear dog with the scar, the one Corden had called his best, turned out to be the smartest animal in the kennel once nobody was frightening it. And it learned rest in an afternoon and never forgot it. The 2 handlers who had laughed all week, she did not punish. She taught them. They turned out to be better than Corden had ever let them be, which is what usually happens to people who have only ever been shown the loud way. The last thing she did, before she left the two handlers on their own, was teach them the word. Not just the sound of it, the reason for it. She sat them down at the wash rack on her second-to-last evening and told them, flat, without naming him, that she had chosen that word a decade before because it was low and long and would carry under exactly the kind of panic that gets a handler killed, and that a good command is not a thing you shout. It is a thing you strike, the way you strike a note, so that a dog that has drilled it 10,000 times hears it below its own fear. Start there, she told them. Start with the word and what it is for, and teach every handler who comes after you to start there too. That is the whole program. Everything else is just dogs. Private Liddell wrote it down. Not the way Corden wrote things down, to cover himself. The way you write down a thing you intend to pass on. On her last morning, the split-ear dog followed her to the gate and sat when she said the word. And she crouched and put her hand flat on its head for a second. And that was the closest thing to a goodbye she allowed herself. A colonel from the wing came down to the kennel that last day. Her name was Nadine Larkmore, and she had been the man on the other end of Kelbourne's phone call 3 weeks before, and she stood at the fence and watched Reeve work a run for a while before she said anything. "Load break," Larkmore said finally. Reeve did not turn around right away. It had been a long time since anyone had used the call sign. "Ma'am," she said. "I ran a patrol your dogs cleared, in Kandak Lantern," Larkmore said. "I didn't know your face. I knew the word." She looked at the 16 dogs, quiet now, orienting on the woman in the grey jacket the way a compass orients. "I've got another kennel with a longer bite log than this one. Different base. It's worse. I've been holding it, waiting to know who to send." She did not make it an order. She left it at the fence between them, the way you leave a thing for someone to pick up in their own time. Reeve looked at the pack. She thought about a corporal who went back for a private, and about how many more kennels there were out there being run loud by men who mistook noise for control, and about how the word only lived as long as there was someone left who knew how to strike it. "Send me the file," she said. "I'll read the dates first." She did not say yes to the rest of it yet. She picked up her clipboard, and she left the word hanging there in the Texas morning, unanswered, the way the truest things always are. If you have ever been underestimated by a loud man who had no idea who he was talking to, you already know the quiet the whole yard felt when those 16 dogs went down. There is another kennel, another bite log, another handler who built a wall of noise and called it control. That story is on the screen right now. Go find out what one word does to it.